Recording in progress.
We're live, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I'd like to call to order this Kirkland City Council and Planning Commission special joint meeting of May the 12th, 2022. We are experiencing an increase in COVID-19 cases at the present time. Given the challenges of having two boards meet at the same time, together with the interested public, we reluctantly made the decision to conduct today's special meeting virtually in order to help protect the health of everyone. Community members have been invited to view or listen to our meeting this evening via Zoom or telephone. Thank you for your patience and support. Clerk, will you please call the roll for this meeting?
Councilmember Nixon.
Here.
Councilmember Black.
Here.
Councilmember Curtis.
Here.
Councilmember Falcone.
Here.
Councilmember Pascal.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Here.
Mayor Sweet.
Here.
Commissioner Allen.
Here.
Commissioner Heiser.
Here.
Commissioner Rutherford.
Here.
Commissioner Singal.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Chizen.
Here.
Vice Chair Racer.
Here.
And Chair Rosman is absent this evening.
Thank you very much, Kathy. All right, so that takes us to the meat of the meeting. For folks who did not hear me request it, we are going to be using the raise hand symbol on the computer for to enable people to, so we can recognize people to speak. And with that, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Okay. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Welcome all members of the council and the Planning Commission to this special meeting. Thank you for giving us this time tonight. We have a major check-in with both bodies on many of the documents and policies related to the stationary plan. You're going to be led tonight, as always, by our senior planner, Allison Zeich. And also with us, we have our folks from Methuen, Aaron Ishizaki and Brad Barnett. We also have a host of city staff who have expertise to answer questions. We are asking all city staff they'll have their videos off during the presentation unless they're called upon or unless they want to make a statement or raise their own hand. So that will include me. So we'll all be here, but we'll be with our videos off unless needed. And then, as I mentioned, Mayor, I'll be watching as well for hands up and jump in if I see someone that you maybe didn't catch to call on. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Allison.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor Arnold, council members, and the planning commissioners here tonight. We're excited to have a thorough discussion with you tonight about several of the in-progress draft documents for the station area plan. I'm going to bring up our agenda here for tonight. We're suggesting that we run this similarly to how we did at our last joint session on April 26th. So we're proposing that we can give you a presentation on each of the kind of draft documents and then pause for discussion and questions. And the high level goal of tonight is really to get direction from the council and commission to help us complete final drafts of these documents for phase 1 of the station area. So we'll be covering a quick introduction and review first, go into the draft station area plan, cover the draft comp plan policies and goals, go into the draft form-based code for the commercial mixed-use district and the draft design guidelines, and then end with the preliminary planned action ordinance. So to hop right into that review, wanted to remind the council and commission about the vision that was adopted by council in December of last year for the station area with the preferred plan direction. And that vision is that the station area is a thriving new walkable district with high-tech and family wage jobs, plentiful affordable housing, sustainable buildings, park amenities, and commercial and retail services linked by transit. To go into our adoption timeline, you've seen this quite a few times by now, but just to remind you, we're talking about phase 1 tonight. So draft documents for phase 1, and that includes the final station area plan document, the comprehensive plan amendments for the full station area, the planned action ordinance for the full station area, and then the form-based code and zoning code amendments for that first phase of zoning, which is for the commercial mixed use district. So that's what we're working on tonight. Just a really quick reminder of how that all stitches together. At the end of last year, Council adopted the preferred plan direction, and we administratively issued the final and supplemental environmental impact statement for the station area plan. We've used those documents to guide our development of the draft station area plan and comprehensive plan documents. Those are really our vision and policy documents. And then those feed our implementation tools, which are the things you see on the right. That's the planned action ordinance, the form-based code, the parcel rezones, which are really included in that form-based code, the design guidelines, and then they also feed any development agreements that the city negotiates. I wanted to take just a moment. We've had a lot of community members spending a lot of time engaging with us on this project, and we've appreciated the time that folks have spent thinking through this project and reading a lot of materials that we've put out there, but wanted to take a moment and just kind of give the highlights of how the council thus far and Planning Commission have responded to a lot of the community input we've gathered since 2019. So some of the bigger changes that have been made to the project via or because of community input have been the special meeting that council held back in May of 2021 to hold a listening session to hear more from the community. And that was prior to making any decisions about which alternatives to advance for further study. The next was authorizing additional analyses for staff to complete prior to advancing in the planning process. And so that's one of the reasons we're here in 2022 instead of completing adoption as originally planned in 2021. Before we moved into the fiscal impacts and community benefits analysis that council directed, you did remove the draft SEIS, alternative 3 from consideration. So that was that highest high-end bookend of growth that was studied in the draft EIS. So that was removed from consideration. And then lastly, council and commission have both continued to emphasize, I think, the key issues that we've heard from the community and that folks really care about, including parks and open space, transportation, and schools. There's a few things that staff is focusing on now as a result of kind of ongoing community input. And so 2 of the bigger pieces that we continue to hear about that we want to think through and make sure we get right are concerns about traffic congestion and parking impacts around places like the potential Google development at the Lee Johnson site and Lake Washington High School. We've also gotten a lot of questions about the pickup drop-off area that's part of WashDOT's project. You can see down here that's going to take the place of where there is a cloverleaf today in the WashDOT right-of-way that connects with the Highlands neighborhood in the future. So some of the things we're doing to address those concerns are looking at specific transportation projects and policies. So that includes writing policies into the draft that include that directs us in the future to evaluate parking zones around some of those areas where we might have concerns about kind of spillover parking. Also, you'll see in the draft plan tonight, actually, that there's several transportation improvements proposed in the Highlands neighborhood to really make a good connection to that pickup drop-off lot. And then lastly, staff continues to coordinate with WashDOT and Sound Transit on their project. And that's included just this week, a presentation with WashDOT and Sound Transit to a workforce or subgroup of the Kirkland Alliance of Neighborhoods. And that WashDOT and Sound Transit team with some station area plan staff are also going to the Highlands Neighborhood Association meeting next week, right after our community open house. So with that, I'd love to hand it over to Aaron Ishizaki from Methuen to walk us through that draft station area plan. I think we're looking for this presentation to be about 15 minutes and then turn it over to Council and Commission for discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison, and good evening, everyone, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members, and commissioners and public. Really appreciate the chance to be here this evening to give you an overview of the draft station area plan document. And just thanks, Allison, for sharing some of the background, again, on the planning process, especially what we've been really building from over the last year or so. Just as a reminder, this plan was prompted and directed by City Council in 2019 in order to leverage that new bus rapid transit station that's being planned at 85th and 405 at that intersection, and really to leverage this once in a generation rapid transit investment within the city. And really as a goal as well to proactively plan for potential growth within the next 20 plus years. We know that it's a strong fundamental market within the station area, and we know that we can expect growth. And so this is a good way to be proactive as a community planning together in how you'd like to see the future of your community. As Allison mentioned, we've had a lot of great engagement and response and comment from the public and the community. And we want to say thank you so much to everybody for engaging with us over the last couple of years on this. You can see on the left here some of the different survey responses, comments, and different kinds of meetings and special engagement that we've done. And I also really want to emphasize that a lot of the work with this plan builds on many of the other planning efforts throughout the city. And those, of course, each have their own planning and engagement process that comes along with those. So we really take those seriously and look for ways that we can incorporate all of that work on behalf of the community together in this document. You just heard from Allison about the vision for the station area plan as a thriving new walkable district. And really, it's an exciting moment because we can begin to think about Northeast 85th and the areas around this juncture within the station area as really transforming from what today, there are certainly major thoroughfares, but more of a place for people to spend time and gather and to really support an inclusive walkable district. And both that can be a model of innovation, a place with really great mobility choices and quality of life, and also deeply rooted in the history of the land, the people, and the culture of this really kind of amazing place within Kirkland. So just to let folks know about the plan document that we've shared, this discussion draft, it's organized with some background material in the first 3 sections. So just an overview and executive summary. We have the second section has some context, and the third is about what are the conditions today. And then the rest of the document continues there's a section on 2 pieces. So one on community benefits and the other on the vision and urban design framework. And these are both overarching strategies that identify different physical plan and design strategies, as well as strategies to help promote community benefits through this planning effort. And those are kind of overarching and guiding the full plan. And then there are 4 chapters: land use, parks, open space and environment, transportation and mobility, and number 10, utilities and public services. And each of those chapters then lay out more specific information within those topics. So I wanted to walk you through some of the key elements within each of these, and we'll start first with the community benefits section. Again, this is an overarching strategy piece for policies and ways to interweave throughout the station area plan. So over the last year in particular, the team is really, we've heard from community members and the public and stakeholders, and we really, as we're proactively planning for growth, we also really want to make sure that the public and the community is receiving the benefits of growth as well. And so in order to achieve those objectives and sustaining great quality of life for both existing and new neighbors, a community benefits policy and strategy framework have been developed. And the community benefits that you're seeing here, so mobility, parks, housing for all, schools, and sustainability, are priority benefits that were chosen based on community feedback, as well as working with all of you within the City Council and Planning Commission over the last year and the study that was done last year. So we'll kind of walk through the strategy pieces on each of these. So for affordable housing, there's a really big focus throughout the plan to look at opportunities to increase housing and multiple different kinds of housing choices throughout the station area. So you can see on the right here within the different potential areas of growth, we're really looking for ways to encourage different types of housing and scales of housing. We made specific changes within the last round in order to incorporate opportunity for housing within Norkirk. Specifically was one particular change. And then there are other ways that this is flowing through is through the form-based code, which you'll hear about later, which helps to ensure that the new housing also creates a pleasant public realm and neighborhood character. You'll see some affordable housing strategies and some of our collaboration with Arch and with other partners also show up and be considered for potential incentive programs as well. On schools, we know this is a really important topic, and while it's not necessarily the purview of the city, formally, there's been lots of discussion and coordination with the Lake Washington School District on this. There's a really exciting opportunity within this more urban format of development to consider more urban schools. And so some things that the team and the plan incorporate are looking at opportunities to enhance and improve safe connections to all of the schools, both the high school, which is within our study area, and the station area boundary, as well as getting to the schools that are on kind of the outskirts of the station area. And really excited about opportunities to incorporate different educational spaces, as well as childcare spaces, potentially within new development. That's a trend we're seeing throughout our region. So that's another piece that's really exciting on the schools front. And then sustainability and resilience is one piece that in particular, there's such an exciting opportunity with this vision of a transit-oriented community, one that's mixed use, that's more walkable. There's a lot of really unique opportunity to make some great progress on the city's sustainability master plan here within the station area. So in order to help facilitate that, we've put together a few things as part of the plan. One of those is we've incorporated all of the goals within the sustainability master plan as part of this station area plan, and then set out a few specific goals and ideas around policies to help advance the efforts here. And so we're really looking to support a future-ready district that's more resilient to the impacts of climate change and to ensure that future innovations aren't being precluded. We really see an opportunity to support community health and to direct incentives towards efforts that are supporting social resilience. A couple of key things to highlight. There's this great opportunities framework for ways that that projects or developments might contribute to broader district scale opportunities. We have a green factor standard, which we talked about in our last meeting, that looks at ways to incorporate green infrastructure throughout buildings and sites, which we're really excited about. We've put together recommendations for how to incorporate the high performance building standards that the city just adopted and how that would apply within the station area. And then we're really taking a close look at opportunities for renewable energy production. And especially with a mix of different uses in the station area, there's a lot of opportunity for possibly sharing resources and efficiencies. So those community benefit strategies, along with this vision and urban design framework, really set the tone for the overall plan and how it's shaped. So within the urban design section, we have these set of 5 key strategies that apply throughout the station area. The first is inclusive transit-oriented growth. So really looking for both a focus around the transit and walkability, but also ways to expand housing and job opportunities and to create more of a balance of uses, both in this district and more broadly in the city. The plan looks a lot at ways to accommodate scale and transitions to neighboring neighborhoods, really focuses on creating more of a place around 85th Street on the east side of 405, and a very wonderful, generous public realm at the same time as we're growing. And on the west side of 405, looking at some key connections between the bus rapid transit drop-off and downtown, as well as to parks and to other key resources downtown. And then of course, mobility and a focus on connecting and breaking through some of those barriers that exist today. And then finally, really leveraging natural systems and resources and improving resilience. All that said, we recognize that each place within the station area is very unique. And so we really are focused on creating walkable districts that people can live, work, learn, and play, and that they each have their own distinct character that also helps guide the plan concepts. So these are some of the different key urban design elements. We'll walk through a few of those quickly. One is within Norkirk, so the Maker District, really envisioning lots of great opportunities connecting with that pickup drop-off at the bus rapid transit station there, and having a great connection downtown that also intersects with the CKC at this sort of juncture that could have a really special character and a great chance to connect north-south as well. Lots of opportunity for active storefronts and incorporating both business, flexible business, as well as housing here, as well as some of those recreation themes adjacent to the CKC. On the east side of 405, we're really focused again on both creating 85th as a place to spend time, but also looking for ways to break down that barrier that exists today. And so 120th is a really exciting opportunity to create more of a main street that connects between Forbes Lake and up the hill to the high school as a really activated public realm. Forbes Lake, just such an amazing resource and also lots of opportunities to enhance that. So we're looking at ways to expand access for folks, possibly connect into the North Rose Hill Woodlands Park and create a bit of a trailhead at the end of 120th. Land use and zoning chapter, I'll just say I'm going to leave that for my colleague Brad because most of that is covered within the form-based code, but you'll see some summary of that within the plan as well. So let's dive into parks, open space, and environment. So within that section of the plan, there's a couple of different things in there. One is we've incorporated a set of different types of open spaces for the station area. And those range from some of the things you're seeing here, like smaller scale pocket parks, community gardens, or even linear space along trails, which are really great opportunities that can be incorporated in many different ways, whether through public lands or through private developments. As I mentioned, Forbes Lake Park is such an exciting opportunity. So we have lots of information in there and are carrying through some ideas that are from some earlier work with the Parks Department and coordinating with the PROS plan on this. I'm so excited about that as a really multi-benefit project potential. And then also, as I mentioned, at that juncture of the route from the bus rapid transit drop-off and cross Kirkland corridor, it's another just great opportunity for a nice open space moment that we can get a lot of benefits out of. And this really pulls through some of the ideas from the CKC master plan. For larger scale community parks, the plan looks at different ways, whether within other plans like the active transportation plan or through this project, that we can enhance better connections to larger scale parks and recreation facilities, including both Everest Park and Peter Kirk Park. Within transportation and mobility, so obviously as a transit-oriented district, this is a big deal. A lot of focus on this. We've been working coordinating both improvements as a part of this plan, along with really linking to the active transportation plan. And main goals are creating a safe, connected network for pedestrians to walk comfortably and to bike comfortably for people of all ages and abilities, and to encourage people to get around and to be able to do so safely. As part of the plan, we did a lot of analysis and looking at what might be possible in terms of goals for how people get around and reach their destinations and important services. And so based on some analysis, the plan does set a target, looking at a target of 24% walking and biking, 29% transit and high occupancy vehicles, and 47% single occupancy vehicle goal for this 20-year plan. And just a note on the image on the right, it is amazing to see how many people can be accommodated in different vehicles and modes of transportation. And while buses certainly take up a certain amount of space, they can accommodate so many more people in comparison to vehicles. And so we're really thinking about utilization of public space and resources, and at the end of the day, getting people to where they need to be. As Allison mentioned, within the plan, there is a summary of a range of different transportation projects that are being suggested. So you can see a few of them highlighted here. And these are just early concepts, but really looking at ways to achieve some of those high-level goals. And then the last section of the plan is on utilities and public services. This is really looking at making sure that the infrastructure is available to be able to support the growth that is accounted for within the plan. And so there's a set of representative infrastructure investments that were studied that would be necessary in order to support that growth. So that is the final component within the plan.
Great, thank you, Erin. And with that, we'd like to turn it back to you, Mayor Sweet. We've suggested some questions to guide discussion. We're asking if we're happy to answer any questions that council or commission have, and would love to know from either body if the plan seems to be adequately and appropriately addressing the vision for the future of the station area, and if there are any suggested changes to the plan or comments.
Okay, super. Thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll kick it off with Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm trying to lower my hand and unmute at the same time. Sometimes it's hard to multitask. Well, thank you so much to Allison and Erin and team. Thank you so much also to the community for engaging in this work. We've gotten a lot of really great feedback from the community, really all along the way as we've been working on this. And thanks, Allison, for having a slide dedicated to that specifically tonight. It was on my mind a lot while reading through this meeting packet. You can just see so much of the impact of community input just woven throughout all the work that we're doing. So thanks for presenting on that tonight. And I know we're continuing to engage with the community and stakeholders, the public hearing that's coming up on the 9th, the CAN meetings that Allison mentioned, and of course, folks can always reach out to us individually. I won't get into all the details. I had, a list of things I wanted to mention that the community really impacted, but Allison, I think you did such a great job, so I won't repeat all of that other than to say I appreciate the community input, but I also really appreciate the responsiveness of staff and the consultants to community feedback. So thanks for that. I'm really happy to see the thoughtfulness that's put in here as it relates to creating a thriving and a connected community through the things that are highlighted, such as affordable housing, sustainability, active transportation, parks, and schools. For affordable housing in particular, I really appreciate the consideration of the need for deeper levels of affordability and larger family units, and not just, more quantity of affordable housing. That was really thoughtful. In sustainability, I appreciate including, high performance green building standards, energy and decarbonization, and the ecosystem's green infrastructure. I really in particular like the green factor idea, and I know Councilmember Curtis, I'm sure, is happy to see the green roofs and the green walls and the green factor score sheet. Don't mean to steal any of your thunder, Councilmember Curtis, but I'm really happy to see the feedback from the community and the Planning Commission and fellow council members all included in this. It's such a great team effort. In schools, I appreciate that this effort has sparked a discussion, not just in the station area plan, but for the city to examine zoning on school properties across the city, so we can ensure that the city is zoning, that city zoning across the city really allows for future development of urban school campuses and other potential uses and partnerships into the future. So thank you for that. With active transportation, I appreciate the enhanced focus on creating a pedestrian scaled network and low stress bike network, as well as the public transportation, obviously central components. For parks, I really appreciate in there that there's a focus on equity and park access in particular. Also bringing together parks and active transportation through things such as linear parks along active transportation corridors. I like the creativity of connecting so many parks, the Forbes Lake Park Vision and connection to Woodlands Park, the pocket parks, etc. I think that's really fantastic. The form-based code elements that I know we'll be talking about later tonight, I think they're just beautiful. They're beautifully clear and simple and easy to understand, easy for, as council members and for the community as well. One thing that we haven't talked a lot about that I'd love to see mentioned in here is public art. This area will indubitably have many opportunities for beautiful and diverse public art. So let's at least acknowledge that in here. We don't have to have all the specifics because I know things will change over the years, but I really want to see that mentioned as a priority here as we're creating this space, for that to be an essential feature, because art has such a way of creating a sense of belonging. And that I know we've had some great meetings with some folks in the community who can help create and facilitate community art projects. So let's see opportunities here to do that as well. I remember near the beginning of the process encouraging us to be both bold and creative. And I'm really proud to say that I think we're doing both of these here with this plan. I know it's taking a bit longer than we originally intended, but it's worth it to do this right. I'm looking forward to hearing from the community, the upcoming public hearing. And I'm also looking forward to our discussion. I know that's forthcoming on more details on the incentivized zoning. Just a couple more points, Madam Mayor, I'm almost done. This discussion also makes me appreciate the important and hard work that the city is undertaking in so many areas, especially as it references so many other plans like the Sustainability Master Plan, the Equity Roadmap, the PROS Plan, the Comp Plan. Whew, that's a lot of work that the city is doing, and they all, overlap and intertwine so beautifully. And I appreciate that we're referencing that and considering that and thinking of things holistically. That's really not easy to do, and I think we're doing it quite well. So thanks again for the thoughtful teamwork, everyone. I can see the vision. I hope the community can too, and it is exciting.
Thank you, Councilmember Falcone. Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Falcone. Great remarks and great kickoff to this conversation. I'll try not to repeat some of the things that you said. This work is transformational, and I think that's really clear to all of us and the community when you look at this plan. And we're really, as Councilmember Falcone said, addressing societal issues that the community thinks is really important: affordable housing, equity, sustainability. And so I really think that we're making great progress, and this was exciting, frankly, to see. Love seeing the elevations, love seeing the visioning, particularly in the Forbes Lake District, how we're connecting that park to the North Woodlands Park. It's beautiful. And I personally am really pleased that we're focusing on sustainability, intensive landscaping, tree canopy expansion, all the things that we, the vision that we've had from the beginning. And I'm going to warn everyone that my comments throughout the rest of the evening are making sure that those goals are filtered through the other elements, the form-based code and the design guidelines and so forth. So be prepared. I'll be talking about trees a lot tonight. A couple of things for feedback on the elements. green infrastructure to me personally doesn't fit in parks and open space. I feel like green infrastructure is more of a focus on sustainability, reducing heat islands, stormwater retention, so forth. And we have it in parks, but we don't really talk about it in parks. We talk about it more in the sustainability section. So I think we should evaluate if that's a good place for it. I personally think it needs to go in sustainability. On the sorry, I've got tons of notes here. And I lost my thought. Okay, so in the prioritizing ecosystems and green infrastructure strategies, we talk about the opportunities framework, but we really need to talk about the benefit and needs for green roofs and intensive landscaping. We sort of throw these terms out, but we need to speak more to why they're valuable. In particular, in the open space typologies chart, we don't talk about landscaping when we talk about green roofs. We have landscaping in all the other ones, but we don't talk about green roofs. And to me, green roofs is all about landscaping, trees, and so forth. And in some of those places, we talk about elements of landscaping, and I'm not really sure what that means. I think that we should talk about landscaping or intensive landscaping and be more clear about what our desires are. In the affordable housing section, we continue to talk about 10% affordable housing. When we talked about the Kingsgate Park and Ride, we were very intentional about increasing that percentage, and we haven't really had that conversation yet. I assume that it's going to come when we talk about incentives, but I'm hoping that in this area we can move beyond that 10% goal to something that's, as Councilmember Falcone says, that's more bold. We don't talk about hotels anywhere, and I'm wondering if that fits in any of the commercial. Is that under commercial or institutional? And I just want to say to the public, we have received the question why we're talking about mixed use on school properties. The school district has asked us before if we would consider allowing for mixed use so that they could do workforce housing. And so that's one of the reasons that we're evaluating that. But this is fabulous. And as Councilmember Falcone said, I'm really grateful to the community and the team that has worked so hard on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Allen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I think it's a great piece of work. I too really love that graphic that shows the 3 slides of the single occupancy vehicles, the transit, and then the bikes and peds. I think that it's such a great graphic that really emphasizes the purpose of us getting more people walking and biking. One of my comments that I would like to see kind of perhaps more of or specifically called out is about seniors. And perhaps it's assumed that when we talk about, being and building inclusionary environments and stuff, that they are included, but we do call out other kind of sets of folks. I feel that seniors are certainly an important part of the fabric of any community. And so we don't really talk much about senior housing, which could be affordable or not affordable or less affordable. So I think that's a significant enough and important enough population that it'd be nice if we saw more about seniors in the plan. And Commissioner Falcone, I really appreciate your mention of more public art. I love going downtown and seeing the art that we have, and then the art that kind of comes and goes. It really makes, again, for a vibrant area. And I think I'll hold my other comments for later. My biggest one there was about the seniors, and actually I do have one more, sorry. We have these sections about education. Most of those we're talking about, like, preschool through 12, but I think it'd be interesting perhaps to make mention of and look at opportunities for post-secondary education, whether that's college, university, or alternative postgraduate, post high school learning opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. Commissioner Reeser.
One of the things that we haven't talked a lot about, but with the, very large additions of housing, the plan shows great parks. I do have a concern that maybe we need to incorporate a little bit more activity in the parks. I was recently up in Bellingham and I was just in awe of, I went to a competition and the spot that I was competing at, right next to it, they had, an indoor pool, an indoor soccer field. They had so much in their facility that met the needs of so many people at different times of the year, not just in, when the weather is great. So they had an ice arena, they had a pool, they had indoor soccer fields, and with this amount of people moving in, I feel that we're a little bit not meeting needs for activities for people who are going to be in apartments and multifamily. So I kind of feel like we should start to emphasize a little bit more meeting the needs of these people who are going to be moving into this area.
Thank you, Commissioner Reeser. Commissioner Single.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to echo and amplify a couple of points that have been made earlier. Specifically with respect to parks, I think one of the things that we're fairly silent about is not just providing open space and green space, but really thinking about gathering spaces where people can gather together, socialize. It can be picnic tables, it could be amphitheaters, it could be places for performances, music, whatever. So really thinking about not just a place where people can enjoy nature, but places where people can enjoy other people. And really thinking about that as part of our open space and park planning. And I think a part of that may also, and again, thinking about a influx of multifamily housing, potentially even rental housing in this area, really thinking about opportunities to talk about community gardens or other amenities that would appeal to people who don't have access to traditional yard type amenities. And then I think the last piece I want to really think about, we should really think about what does it mean to Commissioner Allen's point, think about education beyond education for adults, continuing education opportunities as part of this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussion? Well, I'm going to just make a couple of comments. I want to thank Councilmember Falcone particularly for starting off with such a comprehensive review of discussions that we've all had and experienced as we've gone through this process. This is a cataclysmic or catalytic project for the city of Kirkland, and we are thinking boldly. And this plan is a demonstration that we have spent the time. I mean, I'm really excited about this, and I love the way you have drawn it so that people really understand that this is a 20-year project. And for us to be thinking in those terms, I mean, this is probably almost as hard as next year's comprehensive plan is going to be. So I'm just very impressed with the level of work that has gone into it. I do feel strongly that we need to stress in the report an increased need for housing affordability. We keep sort of leaving that out. So I think that's just a really important element, and that's housing affordability at higher levels of to match our housing strategy, right? And the commitment that we've made to affordable housing. Kasia, thank you so much for the senior comment. I actually agree, since I'm probably the senior member of this particular group. I think that this is a great opportunity, and that is an element that is growing. Anybody who spends any time in downtown Kirkland now recognizes that amenities for our seniors are more and more important. And I think as the baby boomers are aging, or I don't even know which ones are aging anymore, but as we get up there, the housing elements and just elements for what the amenities that seniors need are going to be equally important. Bingo rooms, I don't know. And I think was it Sandeep who said talked about space, and I think it's really hard. It has been from the very beginning really hard to conceptualize space where there doesn't feel like there is any. But when we look at the bigger picture and we look at the opportunities around potentially the landfill, the park and ride, and the enormous amount of space that is going to be freed up with these with the elimination of the not roundabouts, but what kind of things that they are. Anyway, you know what they are. I get really excited, and until I really looked at that design around the pickup drop-off spot, I was more concerned that it was going to be invasive to the neighborhood, but I don't see that anymore. I see a lot of opportunities to make that a really graceful transition. So with that, I think this is great. I think we are absolutely moving in the right direction, and I can't wait for further conversation with the community in June. Council, commissioners, Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to maybe ask this later, but you actually raised it, so I thought maybe this would be a good time to ask Allison. We have received a lot of comments from our neighbors about the location, the design by the State Department of Transportation of the drop-off zone at that northwest corner of the station. I will just say that I've taken a close look at that with all of the feedback that we've received, and you can clarify this for me once again, but the design is by the State Department of Transportation, a design process that began, I believe, about 6 or 7 years ago. When I do take a closer look at that, that seems to me to be the only place where public right-of-way meets state highway right-of-way in the entire station design. Is that everywhere else that I look at, quadrant by quadrant, it's private property, commercial or residential, that abuts the state right-of-way. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I believe that's fair, Councilmember Black, and Joel Funt is also on the line, who was involved in that, coordinated with WashDOT and Sound Transit on that. So that was, I think, one of the reasons that led the siting to that location.
I think the one thing I would add there is that there is a connection in the southwest quadrant that could be made in the Everest neighborhood today, kind of on the end of what would be the kind of local streets down in, I think it's Slater Avenue, or I don't have a map up in front of me, but there is another location there. One of the distinctive differences there is that those are, local streets that are basically dead ends and that kind of thing. And this is of course, a collector street that serves the Highlands neighborhood. And there were also the opportunity for more opportunities for people to kind of continue on through the neighborhood. And because the Highlands does not have any connections further to the north, it was very logical that here we wouldn't have the issue of people picking up or dropping off and then continuing on further into the neighborhood that we thought we might see in the Everest neighborhood.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to underscore what the Vice Chair said about indoor recreation spaces. You know, that's something that I know I've raised before, but I think it can't be highlighted enough. You know, whether it's public, private, or a combination of the two, I think we need to find creative ways to make this happen. There's a growing need for indoor recreational space for folks of all ages in the community, children, families, youth, adults, older folks. Because, you know, as we have that growing need, we're simultaneously, because of affordability issues and so many other issues with there's less and less space, we're having these types of indoor recreational spaces we're seeing diminish and go away in our city. So just wanted to underscore that point. I think it was a really good point that I would love to see us highlight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I think we covered it. Allison, are we back to you?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next segment, if we're ready to move on, is related to the draft comprehensive plan goals and policies. So if the station area plan gives us our strategy and our vision, this starts putting it into words, giving us our distinct goals and the policies that then direct our implementing tools. And so these were included in your packet. We've got the sections laid out here for you. I'm going to try to give you an overview of these rather than just read all of them out loud to you. So I'll go through it pretty high level. I think I can do it in less than 10 minutes. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So first, just to remind you about the comprehensive plan amendments and how we are fitting these into the existing comprehensive plan. The station area plan will have its own chapter, so it'll be a new chapter, and it'll be an overlay over existing neighborhoods. Where it does overlap with those existing neighborhoods, the station area plan will govern. We know there's some areas where the neighborhood plans might have different goals currently for growth capacity or height, but the station area plan is part of the process the city has undertaken to grow intentionally, and will also be addressed and cleaned up as we get ready to start our next comprehensive plan update in 2023. So I'm going to start and just, like I said, kind of zoom through these sections with you. So for land use and development, we have goals and policies. So goals are really to establish growth targets to accommodate a significant amount of the city's growth in this area with that access to high capacity transit, and also to promote this area, as many of the comments have referenced, as a place where all community members are welcome and celebrated. And then we'll have policies that direct us to develop standards that set our urban design principles to accommodate those growth targets in the right way, establish a policy that requires us to establish design standards, and we'll be talking about those drafts a little bit later tonight, and then also policies to encourage us to promote infill development like our missing middle housing, and lastly, a policy, and the complete ones are in your packet. I listed the reference pages number, but a policy to continue to support service providers we already have in the station area. They're very important community members, and we want to continue to think about how we can support them there. Next is the housing section. And so as a result of your input from our meeting on April 26th, we actually decided to set aside housing as its own separate section rather than nesting it under land use and development. We thought that would be responsive and give it the emphasis that we've really heard is desired from the council and commission. So for housing, we have goals to encourage us to plan and achieve housing production and prioritize affordable housing. We'll do that, and we have policies that would encourage us to do that by creating density bonuses that prioritize that affordable housing, particularly at those deeper levels of affordability that some folks mentioned in the last segment. Policies that ask us to expand housing capacity for moderate incomes, and one way to do that might be through missing middle housing. And then policy that encourages us to and continue coordination with those housing organizations and community groups that have been so helpful in the planning process, and that we'll continue to work with. The next section is on economic development. So again, this is just a portion of the goals and policies in the draft plan, but the goal here is really to provide opportunity for this vibrant district with interesting places for people to live, work, play, shop. And we'll do that with policies that encourage us to use those economic development tools to promote retention of existing businesses and expansion of employment opportunities in the district. One of our policies is specifically looking at creating development standards that accommodate a wide range of commercial spaces, thinking that different sized commercial spaces attract different types of businesses, and we want to create opportunities that are available to smaller scale and local businesses. We've heard that's really important from the community to retain those small local businesses. The next section in the comp plan chapter would be for sustainability. And we're going to talk a lot more about that sustainability framework when we get to our implementing tool of the draft form-based code in the next section. So here we have an overall goal to really prioritize opportunities to create multiple benefits across all our ecosystem functions. We're doing that with policies that implement the city's sustainability master plan goals and all the work that was done on that plan. And as Erin mentioned previously, we do have a policy to develop that future ready district, and then another policy to establish a green factor code. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more in the next segment. So parks and open space goals and policies. Really, this goal was created from the input that we've heard loud and clear from the Community Council and Planning Commission, is to provide ample opportunity in the station area for community members to connect with that open space, both the active open space and then passive recreational opportunities, including the open space and managed natural areas. And so we'll have policies in the comp plan that will refer out to the PROS plan that's currently under consideration for urban level of service guidelines, a policy that encourages us to leverage public assets and partnerships, including continued consideration of that excess WSDOT right-of-way where the clover leaves are going to be going away, and looking at that for potential active recreational areas, managed natural areas, stormwater treatment or sustainable landscape areas, and then also policies to identify and minimize gaps in equitable access to parks, and then also a policy that is informing our analysis of the possible incentive zoning program to see how we can get park space through private development by incentivizing it. Transportation there's two different sections of it. So this first one is really focusing on the vehicle network, and so the draft goals and policies here, and a little bit on multimodal as well as I look at what we've got on the slide. So really we're looking to provide that balanced transportation network that does all the work it needs to. This is where we'll set our mode split goal, and so we have that here on the screen. And so if you look at that total in the row at the bottom of that, that would be our proposed mode split goal in the current draft. We'd love feedback on that. And then we'll have policies in the chapter that encourage us to preserve the vehicle throughput functionality of Northeast 85th Street and other major roads. And then also making sure that we accommodate transit service along those transit corridors. And then lastly, I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but one of the things we'll continue to encourage ourselves to do and look at is a policy to utilize tools like residential parking zones, enhanced monitoring, and also enforcement to make sure that we're being mindful about possible spillover parking from things like potentially the pickup drop-off lot in Highlands or over with large commercial developments in the Rose Hill quadrants. On active transportation, the goal here is really to prioritize bikes and pedestrians with the active transportation network. The policies would encourage us to prioritize the completion of that pedestrian network in the station area and sync that up with the forecasted person trips that we talked about a little bit in our last session. Also policies to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about the protection and comfort for walking and biking, especially on those high volume roadways. A policy to provide delineated bike space on Northeast 85th Street. And then overall to also look at improving safety for people walking and biking through intersections. For urban design, the goal here is really to create this, to achieve the vision that we've just talked about for a pedestrian-friendly and transit-oriented district. And so the policies here would tell us to establish those design guidelines, and the drafts of those will be what we discuss later today. And then the goals and policies for the public services and also schools. The goal here is to make sure that we're supporting development with adequate facilities and services, and that we're doing that at the right time. And so one of the policies here would be to ensure that that planned infrastructure and facilities can support the targeted growth, and also that it's available when the growth is there. And then additionally on schools, we'll have policies to identify development standards that can provide Lake Washington School District with more capacity at their existing sites, a policy that's encouraging us to consider bonus incentives or development capacity incentives for new development to provide school space. And then also a policy that will be more flexible about where school spaces can be located within new mixed use development. And then we'll also have a section of that station area plan chapter in the comprehensive plan for implementation strategies. And the goal here is to be forward-looking to ensure that infrastructure and services are in place before new development places the needs on the city systems. And we'll do that through several policies, like integrating the station area project concepts, many of which were developed last year during the fiscal impacts and community benefits analysis, but incorporating those into the appropriate capital improvement programs. That's something we're starting work on already. And then policies to continue studying funding strategies such as TIF, to help provide infrastructure before the system really needs it. And then also continuing to monitor school capacity and how we can help the school district accommodate those new students. And so with that, we'd welcome any questions, and also would love feedback on if there's any additional goals or policies. I'm happy to scroll back to any pages if that's helpful, or just take the presentation down.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Allison. The amount of thinking and visioning around these goals is going to serve us well, not just for the station area, but as others have observed, this is a huge jump start to the conversations we're going to have around the comprehensive plan. I think we're on the right track here. Really excited about this. Have some comments on how we can strengthen and deal with some nuance on this. In the land use section, we talk about establishing growth targets to take a significant share of the city's growth. Well, as we've noted, coming up to this point, we actually have the growth capacity elsewhere in the city. So that's not what's driving a lot of what we're doing. What is driving what we're doing is the work on affordable housing. So the goal about talking about growth targets needs to talk about implementing our affordable housing strategy and what this plan does to meeting the affordable housing targets that we've adopted. Because that gets to why are we creating all this capacity when it's not needed to meet our regional growth targets? Well, that's the reason. The affordable housing piece is a big reason why, and we should say that. Further, when we're talking about housing, there's a goal in there around jobs housing balance. Jobs housing balance is so 2015 comprehensive plan. The discussion right now is more about not balance, but match. What we're trying to do is match housing attainability to the jobs that we have in the city. And so I think we need to have more nuance on that goal. Again, about how we're working to provide housing options attainable for all the jobs that we're creating in the station area, all across the spectrum. In parks and open space, you've heard from a number of people on how we need to be thinking creatively to provide these capabilities. I love all the thinking of what we might do with Forbes Lake. I think it was Commissioner Allen during our last study session that had a brilliant idea of saying, what could we do with potential enhancements with the cemetery? Whether it's a walking path, whether some of the discussion that we had with Commissioner Single about park benches and gathering spaces. There's got to be a way that we can use that property in a way that's respectful to the cemetery, that reflects the history there, but also makes use of this city-owned property in the heart of the station area. And whether there's the opportunity to do a little more thinking of some potential enhancements there, or that becomes a future implementation detail to go consider that. I think that would help strengthen parks and open space. There's also been comments by the mayor about potential with the Houghton Park and Ride, or improvements that could happen in the transfer station area that could either happen as part of mitigation, or if the existing transfer station closes, we'll have a big opportunity there either way. And so that should at least be mentioned in parks and open space, perhaps again as an implementation detail. Under transportation, I think the language around transit needs to be strengthened. It's currently a policy that says accommodate. I think it may need to be raised to a specific goal, because when you think about the number of jobs that are coming to this area, transit has got to work during commute hours. And I think the goals need to be strengthened to do that. We're doing a lot of coordination and advocacy with Metro on how to connect with Stride and make this all work. We should consider strengthening those languages in that policy, or perhaps elevating it to a goal. When we talk about biking and the transportation goal, we just had a big discussion with the adoption of the active transportation plan. And I want to make sure some of the comments from there about saying we should also be thinking of scooters and other ways to roll needs to be reflected in that language. And then finally, under public services and public facilities, the first goal there says the station area plan supports development. That language is actually inconsistent with how we've set other goals, and it was unclear to me, what is it that supports the development of adequate public facilities? Is it the development does it? Is it the city does it? Is it some combination? We should change the noun there, because it's not the station area plan. It is one or the other, or some combination of the city and development contributions. And then finally, you mentioned the overlay of this with neighborhood plans. I expect we're going to be revisiting some of those neighborhood plans to get them consistent, and it might be helpful to have that as one of the implementation details to let people know that that conversation will happen as part of the 2044 comp plan update. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Great comments. Commissioner, is it Reiser or Reiser? I always say it wrong.
It's Rye. It would be like if it was spelled R-E-Y.
Okay, Reiser. You may proceed.
I just had a quick question. Since we started this, we talked about how when the clover leaves disappear, the land could be used for creative purposes. I just wonder how we can get the state to agree to that, because it is a great opportunity, but if it's not on the table with WashDOT, I don't know if we should say that to the public. You know, it just seems like, yes, this is a great amount of land that somehow could be used for some of these goals that we have, especially in our, recreation or, but I don't know if we can say that to the public if it is not a possibility.
Aaron, did you want to address that, or did anyone? Maybe Joel could give us some insight. Otherwise, we can. It certainly will be on our legislative agenda.
It certainly is it really is one of those things that I think is, it does not happen very often. But I guess in the spirit of a bold plan, the only way it would happen is if it's in the plan, but it is fraught with challenges, and WashDOT is very resistant to giving up right of way that once they give it up, they have trouble getting it back. There's also, they are mindful of making sure they have the necessary right of way to fully implement the 405 master plan. And then there is also just the bureaucratic nature of the process of them relinquishing right of way.
Thank you, Joel. And of course, that's part of our conversation ongoing with regard to Kingsgate Park and Ride, probably some around 132nd. City Manager, do you have something to add?
Well, the other thing I wanted to add was that we have had some promise about maybe be able to put open space on the property, even if we may not be able to acquire the property. So I think there's a difference between wanting to get it so we could develop it and having them allow us to do something on it. And I know that Google's also having those conversations. So it's not necessarily all or nothing, but I agree with what Joel said about getting it outright will be difficult, but getting permission to put something that's open space like on it may not be as hard.
Thank you. Did Councilmember Curtis withdraw?
No, I was just in anticipation, and the city manager cut in front of me. So
Got it. So we'll go to Councilmember Curtis.
he could do that though. And Commissioner Reiser, thank you for bringing that up. We have been talking about it in the legislative work group, and we will continue to work on it. And Deputy Mayor, thank you for your great comments. Really well done. I have a couple things. In housing, the goal wasn't on your screen, but there's a goal that says increase access to opportunity, including employment and education opportunities, and improve neighborhood quality of life. Quality of life and neighborhood character are those two phrases that all 13 of us could interpret in a totally different way. And I would like to stop using those phrases. I mean, what is quality life for me is probably completely different from quality life of Commissioner Rutherford. So I would suggest that we talk about improved neighborhood services or opportunities and be more specific about what we're saying there rather than quality of life. I was surprised the Deputy Mayor didn't talk about the sustainability section. To me, it needs a little more work. It feels a little squishy and mushy and not really targeted. I always think about when we talk about transportation, we're just like, we have very clear metrics. We have level of service and all those kind of things. And when we talk about sustainability, we don't have that kind of terminology and language. But I would like to work on this some more. We need to add a policy that adds green infrastructure, green roof, tree canopy expansion, quality landscaping that supports decarbonization, reduces heat islands, and manages stormwater. That's not in there at all. And the last three policies use really soft words like promote and encourage. I would be more directive and talk about that we require innovative green buildings in design, material selection, so forth. So I would work on that. I'm really grateful to the commissioners for their comments on visions for the parks. I completely agree with everything that would be said. My only note here was when we talk about open space plazas and pocket parks, as Councilmember Falcone said earlier, we also need to talk about play spaces. We're not creating an environment just for adults. It's also for children, and we will have multifamily housing there. I feel like, and this is back to what the commissioner said earlier, I feel like we need to define a percentage goal for the amount of open space and parks we expect to be in this area. We've seen the white paper, we have talked about linear parks, but what is our goal? What is our target? I'm assuming that will come forward. I'm hoping it will come forward when we have the pros plan. discussion, but I want to put a pin in it for now. I'm really appreciative that what we're looking to be creative. I agree with Commissioner Allen. It was a brilliant idea to use the cemetery. But we also need more park space in this area. So I want to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pascal.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I just have a couple kind of smaller detailed comments, pretty much building off of some of the comments that I've provided in the past. The first is around the school policies goals. It's really around the school goal that is documented in the draft plan. And the goal, it really uses the language accommodate new students nearby or within the sub area. And I just think that it's much grander than just accommodate. I think the goal is to really look at new types of opportunities, new ways of ensuring that we have the capacity in the school space, not just today, but in the future. So just looking for a little bit stronger language around the goals for schools, and really want to make sure that captures really, I think that has been a big focus from the very beginning for us. And so I just think it's just a little bit more work there on that one. Then around the multimodal mode share goals, very ambitious goals, and I touched on this last time. 25%, 24% walk bike, nearly 50% transit and HOV. Those are very ambitious, and really want to see policies, more policies around how we're going to monitor that over time, because again, this is many years that this will take place. So how are we doing in meeting those goals? And then if we know that, then we can have policies on how we reassess our strategies, our priorities, our funding, to make sure that we achieve those, right? So if we don't measure that, it's really going to be difficult to achieve those, because we have to course correct. We know we'll have to course correct over time. So I'd like to see some policies that are about measuring and about kind of the implementation and course correcting. So anyways, those are my detailed thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Heiser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question, well, I want to say thank you to Allison for all of her hard work on the presentation today and through this whole process. My question or my comment on policy and housing, we're looking as a goal to plan for and achieve housing production. And we're also looking as a policy to promote infill development. My question is, I haven't seen anything in any of the presentation regarding how many planners we need, because planners actually make all of this happen. Every item we want to happen here is a planning department makes that happen. I know we're seeing longer lead times on getting permits issued, and in order to promote infill development, the biggest promotion you can do is to get those permits out more quickly, and to achieve the housing production, to get the housing on the market, to bring it to market. And that happens when we can figure out how many planners we're going to need. And I think that that's got to be part of this plan, the stationary plan, as we see our senior planners are going to start moving up to the bigger projects here, because they're the most qualified to do it. And then we have not enough planners maybe to handle the missing middle housing, which I think could suffer with longer wait times. And those types of product cost more when you have to wait in limbo with permits. So just something to consider when we're starting to flesh out the policy for promoting infill development. I think really thinking about how many planners we need is an important component of that.
Thank you. Does Adam or want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Commissioner Heiser, and thanks, Mayor Sweet. Yeah, thanks for the comment. The additional staffing that is associated with the stationary plan is actually something that we explored in the fiscal impact analysis as well. And it's not just about planners, it's also about police officers and public works maintenance crews and staff across City Hall. So that is certainly something that we're really interested in tracking, and it will naturally lead to additional staffing across all departments of the city. But yeah, we really appreciate the comment. It is something that we're thinking about, and it's a tough situation right now, in that it's a tough hiring market, and we're experiencing lots of development in the city. So we're constantly trying to think of new ways to recruit and new ways to grow the department efficiently, with consideration for what's going to happen in the city in the future. So thanks for the comment.
Thank you, Adam. Commissioner Tim Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had a couple comments. Commissioner Heiser brought up some good comments about permit wait times, and I think we're looking to add that to the 2022 work program of the Planning Commission, and that might be something we need your approval on in the future. Councilmember Pascal brought up some things about schools. On Methune's executive summary on page 4 of 14 of the executive summary, which is page 11 in the packet, it seems like there's been some information removed from Methune's executive summary on schools. The last sentence of the schools paragraph says the team has identified the below ways to address school capacity in the plan, with the opportunity for a future solution to be identified. But then the information below was removed. And then it seems like it's been put in an addendum. I had two questions around schools for maybe Allison. One, are we still exploring school capacity increases within the station area plan boundaries, or are we only at this point exploring the upzoning of existing school sites? And second, Allison, you talked about bonus incentives for pre-K programs. And are you talking about public schools or for-profit daycares, essentially? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. So first, it all requires coordination with the school district, and I would say that we've certainly been talking to them about ways that they can increase their capacity within the station area. One of those ways, as you pointed out, is by granting or considering that additional height at the Lake Washington High School, and that will be formally discussed when we get into the second phase of the zoning code amendments and talk about that specific district, but that is in the preferred plan direction. And I think to your second question, we're looking in the economic analysis for the incentive zoning program at incentivizing any type of school space. I think we've talked about pre-K space a lot because that's what we heard is very helpful to the school district. Those are classrooms that they can generally provide fewer classrooms, so it doesn't take as much space to provide meaningful pre-K space for the school district in mixed use development, whereas I think they have higher concentrations of their larger grade sizes, but we are considering incentivizing educational space for any grade level. And we'll be talking about that more in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Allen.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Sweet. So I'm going to mix some of my comments here. I'm sick, sorry. From sustainability and reducing gas emissions with some of my comments I have for transportation. One of the things that we talk about are parking minimums, which, we talk about being bold. Later in the documents here, we see what some of the proposed parking minimums are, and I don't call those bold. And I think we can do better. We hear so much about, the concerns of the community regarding the traffic in that area. And one of the ways to do that is to reduce cars. And I think we could do a better job reducing cars. I think I have some issue or concern when we talk about building what they call kind of the parking zones around some of the high impact areas where my understanding is that you get a parking permit if you live there. I consider the streets, and I think we all do, the streets are public domain, and my taxes as yours all go to pay for the streets. And I don't think that the street front in front of your house necessarily belongs to you or that you have special privilege to it. So in general, I'm kind of not for that. If we are looking at creating a permit that someone would have to purchase to park within their neighborhood, then I certainly think it would need to be pretty hefty. I have some properties down in Tucson where the market is nowhere near here, and that permit's like only $100. But I think the land here is super valuable, and that people should, if we're going to go that direction, should really have to pony up for that opportunity to rent that space from me, essentially. Sorry, I think I've got all these pages here. I apologize. I think that's where I'll stop my comments for this section. Oh no, I did have one question, Allison. We have this the quadrant that shows the different transportation types between SOV, HOV, and what the goals are. Do you know what the current SOV rates are approximately? I mean, these are only between like 47 and 49. Do you have an idea of what they are now?
I'm going to look at Joel's box here because we included the some existing conditions and targeted growths in that the person trip analysis. I'm going to look to Joel to help me answer if he has that off the top of his head.
Sorry, I do not have that like at my fingertips.
Okay, because again, I question how bold we're being. And so one measurement of that, I guess, would be to see where we're at and where we want to go.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Tim Chisholm, is your hand up again or just not down? Thank you. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So when Councilmember Curtis asked about parks, our Parks Director Liz Webster lost her internet access. So I just wanted her to be able to say a little bit about how the PROS plan is going to speak to the urban development in the stationary plan.
Excellent.
Hi, everyone. It's been wonderful discussion this evening. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed hearing this because we've had an incredible opportunity to receive a lot of community feedback through the PROS plan process. Over 4,000 community members gave amazing comments on what the community priorities are. And what I'm hearing from the planning commissioners are very consistent from what we heard across the community. And we've been able to build these priorities into the PROS plan. And because the PROS plan is occurring at a parallel time track with the station area plan, we've really been able to closely coordinate what's in there. And so the policies, I think, are complementary. The projects that are called out are very complementary. And I think you'll be pleased.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Okay, Commissioner Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I got my hand there. Yeah, I thank you to everyone who's gone to all the work of preparing this and all the comments that have been made so far. I haven't really felt too much of a need to speak up because they're all great comments. I do have a lot of thoughts on this myself. I just find it really tough to squeeze all of the comments into these sessions. I wish there was some way that we could work openly, collaboratively, asynchronously, rather than having to squeeze everything into these meetings. So I'd love to find a way to be able to do that in the future. But here are a couple of points that, as we've been tossing some ideas around, I'd like to share. Councilmember Curtis brought the idea of like having a target for, I understood it to be like park quantity. I was wondering if maybe consider an aim for park quality. And specifically, we need to maximize the accessibility and usefulness of our parks in the station area. And I'm thinking in particular about like how can we make sure that the people who have the greatest need for parks, those who live in multifamily communities, have access to parks, have access to useful parks. Those who live in multifamily have often historically been very starved of having access to open space. So that's one thing that's been on my mind. Also, I heard some people tossing around the idea of pools or other indoor, maybe even for a pool, it'd be even great to have like an outdoor pool. Maybe we can cover it in the future. I know that Spokane has a constellation of many different neighborhood pools across the town, similar to Reykjavik, Iceland, or at least splash pads. Some place to cool down outside that doesn't require running the air conditioning at home and gets people out and connected. I love the ideas for art, creating ways to enable people to create performing art and perform for each other, and enabling people to share in that way. Jumping from parks to parking, because that's also another topic that's very dear to my heart. I'm hoping that most people are aware of the Donald Shoup model for managing parking effectively. And I'll try to summarize his 3 points because I think it's really important, and I don't really see it articulated here. We need to actively manage our curb space, actively manage that is such valuable space. And in particular, we need to charge a price for that is high enough to ensure that a parking spot can be easily found within a reasonable distance, say within a block or so. And then take the revenue from that and invest that in improving the communities where that revenue is collected. And then once that's done, once we manage that curb space more effectively, then we can start talking about being more aggressive in reducing our parking requirements, or even getting to the point of maybe even eliminating the parking requirements, because it is such a huge burden on the cost of building homes, on the cost of building in general. And if we can reduce that cost, we can focus the investment on creating great places for people in this community. I have lots of other ideas I'd love to share, but I want to get through the night too, and I'd love to find ways to balance some of these ideas around so that they're more accessible to all of us here, as well as all the people in the community who don't have the time to listen through our meetings. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion from council or commissioners? I want to thank Deputy Mayor Arnold for starting us out so comprehensively as well. But I have one paranoid retail question to ask. And I guess, what we all know that retail has been difficult to keep filled in downtown Kirkland. We've exploded more recently, but for a time you could not fill retail space. That is changing right now, and what makes me somewhat concerned is that when we talk about using retail space for other uses, schools, daycares, that kind of stuff, I wonder if there's a formula somewhere more updated with regard to what kind of a balance works, whether there's a percentage, whether there's a number. But one of the things that enables small retail to succeed is other small retail succeeding. And if you only have a shop or so in an area, that is going to be incredibly difficult for folks to lease. So just a thought with regard to that consideration. And with that, any further discussion? Back to you, Allison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next section we have is discussing the draft form-based code for the commercial mixed use district and the draft design guidelines, which will be district wide. We think this is going to be about a 20-minute presentation is what we're aiming for. It's about 7:30. Just wanted to check in and see if that sounds right to you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Brad Barnett from Methuen to walk us through this next section.
Right, great. Thank you, Allison. Trying to do remote control, so let me just make sure that's working. Yes, okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you again. This portion, we're going to move from the what, the vision, to the how, sort of some of the tools that we're going to be using to help implement this vision. And Allison mentioned we're going to talk in particular about the form-based code and some related implementation tools like the green factor and green innovation piece, and then design guidelines, which sort of overlay both of those. So last time we talked recently, we went through a lot of the organizing principles and concepts for the form-based code, the idea of the regulating district, which focuses on a lot of the building massing and form questions, the frontage types, which will regulate the base of the building, how it meets the street, and then the street types, which will regulate the ground plane and how streets and sidewalks interact with private frontages. And then design guidelines, which get into more qualitative detail to support the design review process for things like site planning, building facades, building materials, lighting, and so forth. So you can see this is the draft code language here. The table of contents really follows that logic through from those different elements I just mentioned to standards that apply across the form-based code area to those two additional pieces, the green innovation section and the incentive program, which we'll talk about in a minute. And before we dive into the details on those, I thought it was helpful to show an example of how all these different pieces come together, because this is a lot of abstract regulatory language, but you can see these are color coded by those different sections. So the white are examples, so things that we'll get from the regulating districts. The blue are things that we'll get from the frontage types. The yellow are things that we get from the district-wide standards. And then the orange are examples of things that would be covered through the design guidelines. And we'll go through each of these in more detail, but I thought it was helpful to have a concrete example of how all of these different pieces really come together to create the kinds of development, the kinds of places that we want. This doesn't include the green innovation code, which would add additional layers of detail for things like streetscape and trees and things like that. So with that, I'll step into, I think tonight we wanted to sort of move past some of the conceptual stuff and really dive into the weeds a little bit about some of the parameters that we're regulating for the commercial mixed use zone in particular. So as we've talked about before, the regulating districts are the equivalent of the zoning districts for the form-based code. This is an example of the regulating plan that we've drafted for this first phase. And on the bottom left, we've sort of annotated how to read this plan. So the number that you see within each of those is the maximum allowed height. That would be the maximum envelope allowed if the incentive zoning was taken advantage of. There will be a base height, which would be the maximum height that would be allowed by right, that we are still in the process of developing as part of the incentive zoning work. The label refers to what the regulating district is. So the red in this case that we'll be focused on tonight is the commercial mixed use area. And then we've also identified where special transition rules would apply. So this is where we have significant height differences between adjacent zones. We have additional rules to make sure that we're making those transitions to those adjacent areas effectively. And so we've noted those here. Whoops. Allison, I don't know if that was me. Can you get me back to full screen? Thank you. So as I mentioned, we wanted to spend a little bit of time sort of stepping into the details a little bit for the commercial mixed use zone, since that's part of our phase one work. So these are excerpts from the code itself. You can see it's very graphic and tries to make it easy for people to use. On the left, we've defined some of our terms, and then on the right are some graphics that help support the regulations themselves. So I'm going to take just a few minutes and step through each of these and what each of these refers to and how it works. And then, of course, we can come back and talk about any questions or comments you have on any of these. So moving from left to right, the lot coverage and setbacks, this really refers to things you're probably familiar with from other zoning codes. The permitted uses gives general use table, which is not shown here, but generalized to allow for commercial and institutional uses. Residential is not allowed in this zone. The lot coverage specifies the amount of the lot area that can be developed. In this case, 90%, so it's very high, dense lot coverage for this area. And then the required yards specify the ground level building setbacks from the property line. Side and rear yards are regulated in this district. Front yard setbacks are regulated based on the frontage type. And the reason for that is to make sure that if you're building a retail streetscape, you allow for the kinds of depths of setbacks that make sense for that kind of a street experience. Whereas if you wanted to develop on a more residential character, you might have a different front setback. So again, we're trying to find ways to connect the public realm experience to the development of the building. And so that's why the front yard setbacks are moved to that section. And I'll show more examples of the frontage types in a minute. For the massing and development intensity, this is really where we start to regulate the form and shape of the buildings themselves. So the height and the floor area, as I mentioned, there's 2 heights for each regulating district. There's the base maximum allowed height that would be allowed by right. And then there's the bonus maximum allowed height, and that would be the height that could be developed to if the applicant was to take advantage of the incentive zoning program that we'll talk about in a minute. To find those numbers, you just go back to that regulating plan and it tells you what the heights are for your given parcel. Another tool that we're using to help regulate form is to vary the maximum allowed floor plate. So this is the size of the building floor plate measured in gross square feet. And the way that this works is that at different height levels, we restrict the amount of floor area that you can develop as you go up. And that allows us to make sure that we're sculpting the massing so that it gets smaller as you go up. And that allows for light and air to enter into the public realm and also prevents overcrowding of the building. So up to 45 feet, we don't restrict the maximum floor plate. But at 45 feet, we impose a 35,000 square foot maximum floor plate. And that's the maximum up to 75 feet building height. At 75 feet, it then goes down to 25,000 GSF square feet. And then at 125 feet, there's another stepping down to 20,000 gross square feet. So imagine, as you go up, the building size is going to get smaller and smaller. And so that allows us to make sure that we're not seeing large imposing buildings that just go straight up from the ground and overwhelm the sidewalk in the public realm and neighboring properties. So that's a really important part of how we're shaping the building form. Another category are upper level setbacks and tower separation. So the upper story street setbacks apply to any street facing facades. And again, it's triggered based on the height of the building. So at 75 feet, there would be a requirement to set the building back 15 feet at that height. And then as you go up to 125 feet, if that's allowed on the property, there would be another 15 feet for a total of 30 feet setting back. And so again, that's trying to work with the maximum floor plates and other tools to ensure that we're allowing light and air into the public realm and also adjacent properties. We also have a tower separation requirement. Towers here defined as any building taller than 75 feet. So if your building's taller than 75 feet, it needs to be separated by at least 60 feet from the nearest other tower. And so that'll ensure that we don't end up with, again, an overcrowded skyline of buildings next to each other. That's a very common tool that we're seeing in a lot of districts that are growing like this throughout the region. We also have a set of tools that we're using to help regulate the building wall itself. So the maximum facade width is letter J on that diagram on the top right. You can see that regulates the unbroken facade, so how long the building wall can be, and that maxes out at 160 feet. At 160 feet, you're required to have what's called a facade break. That basically means pushing the wall backwards or forwards to help break down the massing and the perceived scale. And then we have the parameters for those facade breaks as well. So the width of that facade break needs to be at least 15 feet. And the depth needs to be at least 5 feet. And those numbers are there basically to ensure that that break in the massing is felt by the pedestrian, by people on the street, that it feels like the building is being broken down into smaller volumes in the way you interact with it. So those are some of the tools that we're using to help regulate the way the building is shaped and formed in this commercial mixed use district. We can come back to those. We're also using tools to help regulate places where there's differences in height between different zones. So these are the transitions I mentioned before. And so these work in concert with the previous ones that I just mentioned. So it's a both and. If you're in an area, all the development, the commercial mixed use needs to follow the rules that we just laid out. And in those parcels where there's a significant change in height allowance, there's this additional set of rules that would apply. And so if you kind of read through the applicability, this would apply anytime the adjacent zone and the applicant's zone have more than a 30-foot height difference. So you can see on the diagram that gray box refers to an area that would allow up to, let's say, 40 feet. If the red zone allows for more than 30 feet above that, so over 70 feet, then a transition would be required. So it's really trying to be context specific to the adjacent zoned heights that are allowed and the applicant's zoned height that's allowed. If a transition is required, then there's a set of steps that you need to follow to make that transition work. And so those involve first setting back from the common lot line 15 feet with a landscaped buffer. After that landscaped buffer, a plane is sort of established. That's that red box that you sort of see that's drawn in there. So you can go up after that landscape buffer to the adjacent zoned height. And then there's an angle we call a sky plane, exposure plane. It's basically an angle of 25 degrees that you follow up. And then that establishes essentially a zoned envelope within which the applicant can build. And so it's one of those picture is worth 1,000 words things. Hopefully the diagram helps explain this. But it essentially means that the resulting building will have to step away from the area that's a lower height in a way that's compatible with the intended urban design outcomes. So that applies throughout the district. That's not just for the commercial mixed use. That's something that would apply everywhere. Anytime you see these height differences. And this is intended to also be future proof. So if you allow a rezone in another area that changes the height differential, this would automatically apply in that area. So we're trying to move towards a rule-based approach that gives clarity to people about what they can expect for how we're handling these adjacent height differences. The other element that I mentioned that I'll spend a little bit of time on just to illustrate some of the tools we're using here are the frontage types. So as I mentioned before, the regulating districts and the transitions are really focused on the overall form of the building and the site. The frontage types are really focused on how do we create an active, engaging public realm experience, which is really focused on the ground floor, the base of the building and how it interacts with the public realm, with the sidewalk and the streetscape. So we've developed 5 different frontage types, which I've talked about before, but I wanted to similarly go through one of them in a bit more detail, just to, again, step into what are the things that we're regulating, what are the levers that we're pushing and pulling on to try to shape that frontage experience. So the first example I'll show is what we're calling an urban street edge. This is a type of frontage that you find all over downtown Kirkland. It's the walkable or urban street wall that is really characterized by a flexibility of ground floor use. It can be retail on the ground floor, it can be lobby, it can be residential, it can be office. It's a flexible frontage type, but it has some characteristics that we've built in to try to create one that's always going to be pedestrian friendly and always going to serve the public realm. So on the right, I'll step through these again. The minimum height, A, that regulates the height of the building. ground floor, that's important because it makes sure that we have spaces that are ready to be used by retail and other active uses. The facade transparency regulates how much of the frontage needs to be transparent, and that's important for creating ground floor experiences where you can see into the building, where you can see what's going on, and creates a more pedestrian engaging experience. And then we have something that's similar to the maximum facade width that I talked about in regulating districts, but this is specific to the ground floor. And the reason that we're regulating those separately is because as a pedestrian, when you're walking, or as a cyclist, when you're biking, the cadence of how wide the street level bays are really affects your experience of the scale and the size of the space. And so these vary by frontage type. For more retail focused ones, they're longer. So in this case, 65 feet. You'll see in a second when I get to townhouses and stoops and porches, they get narrower to reflect those types of housing and building forms as well. We also look at the entrances because that really activates the streetscape, seeing people coming and going. And so locating those entrances on these street facing frontages and also having transparency requirements so that those entrances are inviting is regulated here. And then finally, as I mentioned, we have some tools to help us regulate the public realm interface. So how the building meets the sidewalk. So the front setbacks, the required yards, I mentioned those were in the frontage types. This is where they show up. We've given people a minimum and a maximum. And so that allows some flexibility for the building designer, for the developer to decide within that range where they want to locate the building edge. And that's important because it provides for a balance between flexibility for the specific site conditions, but also ensuring that it's a cohesive streetscape where you don't have very deep setbacks right next to a zero lot line, narrow setbacks. So it creates some coherence in the streetscape. And then finally, we have some additional tools for things like creating sidewalk zones, amenity zones, corner designs at important intersections to create those opportunities for small plazas and gathering spaces and reduce some of the building mass at those corners. And then I think we mentioned this in the last meeting, the ground floor parking setback is something that requires that parking not be the ground floor use that faces the street, but that it's instead pushed back into the building to ensure that there is retail or residential or some other active pedestrian engaging use on our street fronts. I won't go through all of the street frontages right now in as much detail, but I'll just go through them really quickly to show you how these things change. So as we move from urban street edge to a retail streetscape, where we're really trying to focus on creating a high quality shopping and retail experience, you'll see that the facade transparency went up from 50% to 75%, and that's to anticipate more shopping experiences. And then you'll also see, if I go to the next one, as we move into more residential focused ones, that facade width went from 65 down to 36 feet, again, to reflect the cadence of row houses and porches and stoops and the kind of architecture we expect at that scale. We also have one for plazas for how we want public space to be integrated into the streetscape. And so this gets to a lot of the comments that we heard earlier about how the different pieces of open space could tuck into the future vision for the station area. So we have some guidance for how big and what kinds of characteristics the plazas should have. And then finally, looking ahead to future phases as we get into some of the other types of neighborhoods that we're zoning for, we started looking to private yards where we would have a mix of missing middle housing types and single family, lower density housing, and how the yards and other elements come together for those. We just have another minute or two left. So another piece of this is our draft design guidelines that we've been working with staff on. Those add additional qualitative guidance and feedback to help the design review process interpret and provide feedback to applicants. And so those include guidelines for site planning around streetscape, public spaces, pedestrian connections, lighting, other elements. And then also go further than the form-based code does for building design. So whereas the form-based code focuses on the form of the building, the shape of the building, the design guidelines get into things like how to articulate the massing, how to handle blank walls, specific material choices, a lot of those other details. So it works really closely with the form-based code to kind of go to the next level of design specification. And also those guidelines will then vary by character subdistrict. So Forbes Lake District will have different guidelines that add to that character from the Rose Hill Gateway, for example. And then I just wanted to spend 1 or 2 minutes introducing the green innovation and incentive zoning pieces, but I suspect we probably will need to come back to those in more detail. So this chapter sets up some of the policies and regulatory tools around the green innovation code. So this includes both taking on board some recent city initiatives around high performance buildings, adding to that energy and decarbonization standards that would be required for future development over a certain size. And then also implements the green factor concept that Aaron mentioned earlier, which is how we integrate green infrastructure into private development and open spaces. The green factor, I don't expect you to read all of this right now, but the way it works is there's a scoring process where we have these different categories: landscape elements, green roofs, green walls, etc. And you can see on the right that you get points as you accomplish those things, and it's scaled by square footage or other quantitative parameters. And so basically you add up your score and you have to meet a minimum score in order to make the green factor checklist work. So that's how that works. We can come back to it if there's additional comments or questions. And then something that's in progress, so I just wanted to show it to show kind of how it's landing in the overall code development, is the incentive program, which will be how applicants can unlock some of that additional height or development capacity on sites. And these respond directly to the community benefit topics that we've been exploring. So affordable housing, mobility, parks and open space, sustainability, and schools, education, and childcare. And so this is in progress, but wanted to show where that stands today. And with that, I'll open up these questions and turn it back to Allison.
Thank you, Brad. Madam Mayor, these are the questions we have suggested for discussion, and we'd invite any questions or comments the Commissioner Council has.
Thanks, Allison. Goodness, this is a lot. Well, let's kick it off with our green girl, Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I lost my internet. That's the worst panic when you're trying to get back on and wonder what you're missing, but happy to be back. I'm going to try to do my comments sort of broadly, in that the mayor's right. I'm all about the intensive landscaping that I expect in this area, that as we get denser, that we're going to go greener. And in the frontage types, for example, the plaza, it says 75% must be occupied by pedestrians. It says nothing about the percentage of landscaping that should be in that area. And so I picture this concrete courtyard. So I think we need to be very, very prescriptive about the kinds or the amount of landscaping we want, not just in our street fronts, but I imagine that some of these buildings will have elevated plazas that aren't on street fronts. You know, it will have balconies and all of those things. And I think we need to be really clear that our expectation is that, again, there's intensive landscaping. I saw that in the form-based code. I really was missing in the design guidelines. What I worry about is we all have been collaborating for years on this project, and we're going to hand this off to the design review board, and we really need to make sure that our vision is articulated in the design review guidelines so that they can execute our vision. And I didn't see that in the design guidelines, and I realized they're sort of the tail of the dog, and that we're developing those after we finish everything else. But I felt like the whole landscaping piece and the expectations of green spaces and so forth were not in the design guidelines. The green factor is great. I'm hoping that we will get to a point that every building will have to have X number of green factors, similar to what we are doing with tree credits. I'm curious, I mean, this is borrowed from Seattle and Bellevue. They've had it for a little while. Have we gone back to Seattle and Bellevue and said, is it working? What would you do differently? How can we improve this? I'm curious if the green factor has been reviewed by our in-house staff specialists, the stormwater retention team, our arborists, Green Kirkland, to see if they've got some feedback on it. and then again, to me, we really need to be clear in what we're communicating to the developers, to our design review board, and to the community on these two pieces of it. Let me check my notes real clear to see if there's anything else. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Sorry, muted. Councilmember Pascal.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Brad, thanks for the presentation and the materials. I thought very easy to understand. A lot of complex information there, but great to kind of read through. So I have like a couple questions and one comment. The first question is maybe to staff, maybe Allison or Adam. Let's just talk about form-based code for 1 minute, just kind of at the very high level. The question is what are the biggest changes that the public are going to see from the outside, not by looking at the code and comparing the code, but from the outside? Because when I think of Kirkland, because what I heard you say about form-based code is really focuses on form and shape. But when I think about Kirkland, I think about the buildings. Our buildings have good design, good shape, good form. So I'm really wondering, what's the biggest change that people are actually going to see from this?
I can start on that, and then I'll invite Jeremy or Adam to tag along, or Brad. So I think, we're doing it at a time where we're also changing the zoning and some of the uses, particularly in the commercial mixed use district. So there'll be some obvious change there. What we hope to see is that the street types are better integrated with the public realm, and there's new standards for street types and more generous landscape buffers, bike lanes, pedestrian sidewalks. And so that's going to be one of the big changes that people see. And what we also hope the form-based code accomplishes is that it's easier for the development community and the non-developer community to understand what we're going to get. And so we see that as a big advantage with the form-based code, is it does provide, we think, a higher level of predictability for what the built environment will look like in the future. And I invite any of the other team members to jump in if they have something to add.
Okay, well, yeah, so that kind of confirms what I was, I guess, trying to say, is that it's not necessarily that you'll see different things from the buildings. It's just that it's going to be more intuitive and straightforward for those that are coming in to develop about what they can build, is what I'm hearing. Because Kirkland has spent a ton of time and energy and resources over the years to really sharpen our design standards for buildings in all our commercial areas. So I just want to kind of put that out there. That's not like a wholesale change in terms of what we're going to see. The comment is really kind of a nuts and bolts comment, because this is where, do our goals and our vision and our policies align with kind of the actual kind of specific design standards, right? And are they supportive of one another? And that's really the question that we need to make sure those things are in alignment. And so I have a comment on the street cross sections. This is following up again from a comment I made at our last meeting, because we only saw these cross sections, I think, after that meeting, right? So a few days after that. So it had some time to kind of go through that. And I guess kind of thinking really long term and looking at some of those illustrations that were particularly presented in the draft sub-area plan, we saw these really great illustrations of what the sub-area might be in the future. And the one thing I noticed was the emphasis on the 120th Avenue corridor. It had a big yellow line right through it with arrows and showing how important that was to providing access and multimodal activity to essentially where the bulk of our density is going to be, in the biggest buildings, the most activity. Yet what I saw from the cross sections was on the north side of 85th, it was regarded as a main street, 70-foot right of way. And then on the south side of 85th, it's regarded as a neighborhood mixed use street. So narrower right of way at 64 feet. But that south side has the tallest buildings, the most employment. It's connecting to potentially a Lake Washington high school site that's going to be larger in the future, yet it's not, I feel like it's not really consistent with really what we need to achieve from that. So I see it as, it basically is going to look like what's going through Totem Lake Village today, which is a great looking street, but I'm looking for, our 8-foot sidewalks really what we envision for that street when we have 250-foot buildings and 7,000 employees right there? I think it needs to be bigger. We need to have more amenities, particularly along that section. And then on the Main Street side, on the north side of 85th, you know, if that whole area redevelops as it could 20 years from now, I want to make sure we're thinking about that. And we don't have designated bike facilities identified in those design standards. Basically, it's a shared use pathway on one side with pedestrians. So, you know, that's just an example of where I just don't think we're thinking big enough for that corridor, particularly for those mode shares that we're trying to achieve, 25% walk bike. I think that's where we're not being consistent in the goals and the vision, and then on the ground kind of design. So it's not a complaint. It's just more like we got to kind of sharpen the pencil here a little bit, make sure that we're consistent. Thank you.
You're muted, Mayor.
Sorry, it's the finger on the key. Brad or Allison, do you want to respond to that at all? Or just take it as a?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Council Member, for the comment. I think that's a great note for us.
Super. Okay, Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Brad. I completely concur with Councilmember Pasco's comments. I think that we need to spend some time on the map on page 66 and potentially have some revisions, especially on the south side of 120th. I don't know if that characterization of a neighborhood mixed-use street came out of existing conditions, but the fact that half of the street front there is covered by the cemetery, if there is an opportunity to change that and make that a main street, we already own half the property anyway. And so perhaps there's a phasing or a long-term goal that says where we want to go with that particular street. I also think that we need to spend some time on 85th looking at what the major thoroughfare is going to look like in different segments. I was reminded today, as we are closing on a agreement with Sound Transit and a number of transportation improvements that the city will be building, that we are required to add an existing lane on 85th up through 122nd, and that needs to be reflected in what we look at what the lane configuration is going to be on 85th. So I think we need to spend some more details on what that's going to look like, and it'll help us in the decision of what the street crossings will look like. Finally, the street types talk about residential type 1 versus type 2. The map just talks about things as residential streets. It'd be helpful to understand where we're going to have type 1 versus type 2 and make those decisions deliberately. And then finally on design, I have one question, especially since Commissioner Rosman is not here. She and I have had some conversations previously, and perhaps she's brought this up during the Planning Commission about passive house is a sustainability standard, which we're supporting, but that sometimes the design guidelines around modulation work against some of the design in passive house. Was that something the Planning Commission has discussed? I want to make sure that that had those particular concerns were addressed. Thank you.
I can speak, Deputy Mayor, to the latter point about passive house. We have talked about sustainability and other construction techniques and how those relate to the modulation. So it is something we've looked at. It's part of the reason why in the design guidelines, we specifically mentioned not overly modulating buildings because it can create those kinds of challenges. And also in the form-based code, we have fairly restrained modulation requirements, just that single facade break to try to minimize the amount of complexity on the facades. That also is really important for other low carbon techniques like mass timber, which also doesn't want to often have those kinds of modulations. So it's an important point across a number of different sustainability techniques.
Great, thank you.
Sorry. Commissioner Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I mentioned before, I think the structure of the form-based code is really elegant, and I'm looking forward to refining it over the next few weeks. That said, I do have some significant concerns with how some of the details are taking shape. I'm kind of concerned, like, why should we be prohibiting residential from our core areas? Some of the frontage types and regulating district standards seem to be very oriented around particular uses rather than form-based codes that I'm usually see those as being, defining a particular intensity of use rather than arbitrarily limiting or specifying particular uses. But more specifically, I'm concerned that this would effectively outlaw the ideal of nurturing a fine-grained diversity of uses, which Jane Jacobs is famous for documenting as being so necessary for an urban streetscape that feels safe for everyone. And as I was saying, it feels a bit contrary to the ideals of having a form-based code and what I've seen with form-based codes elsewhere. The second area of concern, and this is probably just something that I need to learn more about, but lot coverage, setbacks, and massing regulations. I know you spent a bit of time, Mr. Barnett, on helping clarify what the purpose is on some of these, but there's still some things that I fundamentally have a challenge with, such as the gaps created by the facade break depth, which as you're walking along these sidewalks at night and you're walking around a corner where you can't see, it can kind of be a jarring experience if there's maybe someone in the corner there that you don't see. Having straight sight lines in urban areas is really important, and I'd like to be really conscious, be really careful about making sure that these streetscapes really feel safe for people at all times of the day, no matter who you are. The third point, driveways. I was trying to find where I see there's some concept of like we're avoiding putting driveways on main streets and the thoroughfares, but I didn't really see much more guidance on driveway location criteria. So I'm hoping that we can see some of that more in the future. And finally, my last point, design guidelines. And others have mentioned concern about, how is this going to be different than before with form-based codes? And one of the big opportunities I see is maybe we won't make it in time for the first draft, but I'd really like to be able to see us transition from design guidelines toward regulations that provide more certainty and with prescriptive language so that both neighbors and builders have more certainty of the designs that are allowed. And then also with this, permitting of more projects can be streamlined and handled administratively rather than requiring board review. So we might not get there in this first draft, but I'm hoping maybe in future iterations we can work toward that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Singal.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My thinking is heavily influenced by the fact that we've spent a tremendous amount of time recently designing or planning for the Bridle Trail Shopping Center area, and a lot of the similar types of discussions in a non-form-based code environment for how to think about activating streetscapes, how to think about a pedestrian-oriented area. And I worry that the shape of some of these form-based codes is kind of missing some of the learnings that we've had from that process. So I guess I would start by encouraging the project team to kind of go back and review some of the discussions that we've had previously with respect to bridle trails and see if there's any lessons that can be learned. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight in there. One was the conversation about articulation on the street facade. One of the things that I think we kind of largely discovered is that rather than talking about articulation as being something that can go both out and in, we really realize that by pushing articulation to be inward, you actually create more active street space and places where street furniture can actually be placed. A similar conversation comes into an area where we want this area to be more transit oriented, given the location of the BRT. And so being very deliberate and explicit about drop off and pickup zones, and making sure that that is actually part of our design or design standards in the space, that each building or each place where people are going to be has a reasonable set of pickup and drop off zones where, you know, people aren't forced to drive and park, but can actually be delivered to that area and then walk from there. I would like us to go back and think about, we've had a lot of discussions also about rooftop amenities and how rooftop amenities can be used as a tool to drive additional public benefit. So in providing access to the roof for private use, can we actually then trigger public benefit either from that rooftop amenity or from additional public benefit from the construction? And then finally, I think an area that's worth exploring is how do we want to think about things like signage in this area? I think we have an opportunity to either say that the existing sign code is sufficient or go back and think about whether there's some opportunity to build more of a village or consistent feel through consistent signage throughout this district. With that, I'll wrap. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, thank you, Brad, and thanks everyone for this great discussion. I won't repeat what's already been shared, but just a couple things to add. I've noticed as reading through this and also with the briefing tonight, I can't help but think that a gap that we have is really acknowledging our plans around being truly inclusive to those living with disabilities in our community. You know, how does what we're doing with parking really impact those who have mobility issues, for example? When we talk about, thank you, Councilmember Curtis, for bringing up playgrounds, you know, and play spaces for children, to be truly inclusive, do we have places that are fully fenced in? Are we going to require something like that in this area for children? If there's going to be so much traffic in the area and so much going on, I think about the safety of toddlers and autistic children and others who are more likely to elope into dangerous areas. So I just want to, I guess my question is kind of twofold. I really want us to lead with our value of inclusivity here and really make sure that that's well documented in not just, you know, we're talking about form-based code here, but I'm thinking just larger in our plan here as well. And also, really practically speaking, I don't have a really good idea about the impacts of the decisions that we're making here on individuals living with disabilities in our community. And I'd like us to be a little more thoughtful about that. And I personally would like to have a better understanding of that to see if there are changes that we need to make, or maybe it's okay and we just need to highlight why what we're doing is good. And I don't, you know that I don't want us to just meet minimum legal requirements here, right? I always want us to go above and beyond, really being truly inclusive to those living with disabilities in the community. So that's one point. I also wanted to clarify my comment earlier about indoor recreational space. I wasn't just just want to be clear, I'm not talking just about pools and aquatic centers, but really talking about all kinds of indoor recreation spaces. I'm thinking of bowling alleys and trampoline places and laser tag and, gymnasiums, indoor playgrounds, and other indoor gathering spaces that we're just seeing less and less of. So some of that may be covered in the pros plan. Some of that may be covered with work that the city is doing, but some of that may really be, I see, for example, the Maker District as potentially being a space where we could, encourage private development for indoor play spaces and incentivize that in some capacity, because that's a really huge need in our community. And thirdly, only because I don't want to have to raise my hand again under final comments, I was just wondering if we have an update on the plan for naming this zone. We keep still calling it the 85th Station Area Plan, and just curious from staff if we have any update on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Falcone. I can give you a brief update on that. I had it on my last slide, but I'll just give you the update now. We are working, we have our Deputy City Manager, Jim Lopez is working with tribal leaders to identify the potential of a place name that honors the Native history of the district. But in addition to that, we are going to have a survey, a community survey ready to launch by the May 18th open house. And that will include several of the options that Council and Commission discussed last time, along with a placeholder for a potential Native history name. And that'll be going out to the community and run for a few weeks, and we'll be reporting back on the results of that survey. And we'll be suggesting that Council potentially selects that name when they consider adoption of the plan.
Sounds great. Thanks, Allison.
Thanks, Allison. That was going to be my question as well. Commissioner Tim Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the plan, there are several references to security and police. There's not a lot of specificity in the plan. In Bellevue and Crossroads specifically, there is an additional satellite police station in the Crossroads area, because the Crossroads area has disproportionately higher levels of crime in certain crime areas. Certain crimes are just higher in Crossroads. But I'm wondering if the city has thought about having a satellite police station to ensure security in the area. If we're really going to put 20,000 people up and down this street. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Allison, do you have a response to that, or?
I can start, and I'd invite Tracy, who's on the line, to add more detail if she has it. But that is one of the things that we looked at when we did the fiscal impacts and community benefits analysis, was how the police department could continue to serve growth in this area. And so one of the things we looked at was if they would need additional space. I believe, I'm going to look to Tracy to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the option is open. We're creating a space where flexible uses can be introduced if the need arises. I don't think, we do not have a specific plan at this time to require that there be a satellite office in the area.
Thank you, Allison. Is that it for you, John? Thank you. Commissioner Allen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Brad, thank you for the great visuals and stuff presented. I find them super helpful. So I really appreciate that those have been continued to kind of worked on and modified to give us the best idea of what things are going to look like. I did have a comment about bikeways. There's a chart in here that talks about on various streets there are different widths for bikes, and one of those being like, looks like 85th, it'd be like 6 feet, but asterisks really only 5 feet. And I just want to make sure that, you know, kind of when those are considered, or has that, if passing has been considered. I pass people all the time, and believe me, actually I get passed more than I pass. So just making sure that that is something safe. And if along that way it's bikes and pedestrians, that perhaps that's on the same level, so that, you know, if I do have to scooch a little over to get around somebody, that space is available, just to make that safe and something I don't have to go into the street for. And then my second question along those lines is that it looks like bike lanes are missing from the Main Street concept. And so I guess my question is why?
I'm going to suggest that Joel jump in on the passing and the widths piece, but on the Main Street piece, we wrestled with that when we've gone back and forth. And right now, the only Main Street is 120th. And so it was sort of site specific to that. And based on the transportation analysis that our transportation consultant was doing, we found that that street has some particular challenges with different modes balancing because the parcels that it serves back up against 405. So they're one-sided parcels in terms of traffic access. And so we did pull dedicated facilities off of that street, created really strong linkages parallel to that with the future trails on the surplus properties to the west. And then 122nd gets a really high quality treatment as well. And then of course, 85th and 90th and 80th kind of create this super block of bike facilities. So the intent was to try to balance that decision, but it was something that we went back and forth on because we've generally been trying to create a lot of redundant networks. So you're right, it is missing right now, and those were the technical reasons for it today.
Thank you.
And Joel, I don't know if you want to speak to the passing distance and the widths for the bike lanes.
Yeah, I can real quickly. The idea with the plan with the separated cycle tracks that we're creating, say along Northeast 85th Street, is that those are they're behind the planter strip and between the landscape strip and the pedestrian facility, and they would be 5 feet wide, then with a 1 foot delineation between that and the pedestrian space, but they would also be at the same level. So there is flexibility so that you could make a passing maneuver, that type of thing, if you needed to, and you could do that safely.
Thank you. My second set of comments, I'd like to take you back to the beginning of the presentation, and Allison showed us this great aerial photo of 85th, looking west with parts of the lake in the background. And when you look at that, it's great. We've got tons of trees. We also have tons of parking lots. And there's actually, in the very quick moments I had to look at that, there was way more coverage of land with parking lots than there were of actual buildings. So I'm really excited to be moving those parking underground or kind of behind buildings. We didn't talk too much about parking in this most recent part of the presentation, but it is within this section. And again, I'll borrow a notion from Deputy Mayor Arnold. I think that we're looking at parking, the way we're looking at it is like so 2022. And I think we're looking to the future, and we need to be more bold in what we're going to be requiring. We're putting so much emphasis on the affordability of housing, and we know that the cost of building parking is crazy expensive. And so I think we could do better. I think we could still do better there. One thing I haven't seen necessarily pulled out, or maybe I've just missed it, is any kind of requirements for like rideshare accommodations. And we've all seen it or been behind a car where it's just stopped in the middle of the street as people decide to jump out or jump in. And so I think it might be nice to be able to address that and have buildings have specific areas, perhaps not on the main streets, but on the sides that are meant just for rideshare, or if there's a community area where it might be a rideshare bump out that accommodates, either side of a block area within that neighborhood. And finally, I appreciate what Mayor Sweet was talking about as far as like the density of businesses and how that they all support each other. It's like the more the merrier. And so I'll go back to cars, since I seem to like to talk about that. And I think certainly the more density and diversity that we can have of those businesses, we can get people who are living there to stay there and to run their errands there, and make it a bigger pain to go get your car than it is just to walk outside and complete your errand. There were, in February of this year, there were 4 million trips under 3 miles in King County. And that's a lot of little trips that I think we, through creative transit and bikes and pedestrian. We can cut down on a lot of those single occupancy trips and really start achieving a lot of the goals that surround all of that around community, about people being on the streets, seeing one another, about keeping our businesses thriving, about lowering gas emissions, and about creating real affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? I just want to, oh, nope, she's gone. I think the only thing that I would add is this particular discussion is like the math of this process for me. So I struggled with it, Brad, and I really appreciated the diagrams because they made it more real, the pictures, the stacking blocks. It made it a whole lot easier to understand. I also really appreciate the comments from Councilmember Pascal and Arnold with regard to the treatment of 120th and up by the cemetery. I think the cemetery presents us with some marvelous opportunities. It's so beautiful, and if we can make it be more accessible and part of the neighborhood, it would be a very good thing. But with that, we still have a ways to go. So back to you, Allison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next section, if I could, I suggest I just have a couple slides on the planned action ordinance and then some next step slides. If it's okay with you, I'd love to just run through them and get to final comments all at once, if that's okay.
Let's do that.
All right. So in the packet, we also included a preliminary planned action ordinance. It is an iteration of the preliminary planned action ordinance that was included in the final EIS. So it's been out there since the end of last year. Just a couple points on it. I'm not going to read through that preliminary draft for you tonight, but just reminding you, it is informed by the final EIS, and this will be the place where we include specific mitigation measures for impacts that were identified for future development. And it'll also lay out the process through which new development can apply to be a planned action, meaning that they're covered under the environmental review we've performed here for the stationary and the final EIS, and wouldn't have to do their own SEPA review. So it would be covered under the thresholds identified in this. If they were doing something that potentially exceeded those thresholds, new environmental review would be required. So the planned action ordinance kind of lays that out. I do have a slide to land on if there's any questions on that, but with your permission, I'll go through the next steps. So these are our upcoming events. We've mentioned a couple times tonight, but I really want to highlight that next Wednesday, May 18th, we are holding a community open house. The purpose of that event is really to introduce these draft documents to the community, similar to our work here tonight, and then also help the community understand the legislative process we're getting ready to start and help them prepare to participate in that legislative process primarily by providing a comment at the public hearing of the Planning Commission scheduled for June 9th. We have heard from the community the desire to do some type of in-person engagement with the stationary. I think the mayor's statement at the beginning of the meeting is a reality next week as well as this week likely. And so we did prioritize being able to provide the community with a level of certainty about the format of that open house by holding it virtually so that we didn't have to change the plan on short notice. So the community open house will be virtual. However, we are going to be creating a stationary display in City Hall. And so that will consist of several posters that display a lot of the images and the plans and diagrams you've seen here tonight. We hope that's somewhere where the community can come and engage with the work product here. Staff will also be available in person. We're working out the details of that, but as we have been, we'll continue to be available when the community wants to talk to us. So trying to provide opportunity for in-person learning about the station area as well. That'll all lead up to the hearing, the public hearing for the draft documents. We have that scheduled for June 9th, and then council consideration of adoption later in June. And then, of course, picking up phase 2 and the form-based code for the remainder of the districts after we finish up with that first phase. Councilmember Falcone already prompted an update on the naming the station area. So I mentioned that is an ongoing process. We look forward to updating you on that once we receive the results of the community survey. And with that, I'd welcome any additional questions or comments.
And I'm not muted. Yay. I'm going to take the liberty of starting this off just by saying how grateful I am personally on behalf of everybody here for what an amazing, comprehensive presentation this has been. The report was, this has just been a really good process, and it makes me really look forward to what we will be able to do when we do our comprehensive planning process. So with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Heiser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Allison, I was wondering, with the planned action area that you just spoke about, how long is the FSEIS good for? Does that expire at some point? And is the city going to have to redo that environmental impact study?
Sorry, I lost my mute button for a second there. And so it doesn't have a timeline on it. It has a growth threshold on it. And so we'd be tracking the new jobs and housing units and trips that are happening as new development occurs. And there's a cap on how many jobs, housing units, and trips would be covered by that planned action ordinance in the station area.
Okay, do you have those numbers by chance? Or is it like half the growth we're anticipating, or?
Yeah, so for growth, we've got for housing units, approximately 6,200 new households. For jobs, it's I think 17,700 and something new jobs covered by the planned action ordinance. Trips, I don't have as on top of mind. If Joel has it or if someone else has it, I'd welcome them to share. But that one I don't have is immediately available.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. That's great information. Thank you, Allison.
Yep.
Okay, Commissioner Allen.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the incentive program that's in our packet, but we didn't have an opportunity to go over it. So I'm curious if that will be something we study together at a later date, or if that's being brought to the commission, and I guess whether that's something that we'll be deliberating from the June 9th Planning Commission meeting.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Allen. And so what we included tonight were the draft amenity list. So those are the things we're testing in the ongoing economic analysis. What we anticipate doing at a future date is bringing you suggested or recommended packages of options. So those would be packages of what would be included in the base, because what we put in the base has impacts on how much room we have to incentivize, and then possible packages for the incentives as well. And I see Tracy just turned her camera on, and I invite her to share additional details on that.
Great, thanks, Allison. Yeah, I think that we wanted to get the structure in front of you so you could see the items that'll be in there, but we have been essentially somewhat in a holding pattern to figure out what will be in those base requirements. And so now that we have so the draft form base code, we are actually, the internal team is meeting to start to put the dollars or the exchange rates together so that you have packages. And I think that we anticipate that we'll bring that information forward for consideration probably at that June 9th discussion. I think that I'm just kind of looking to Allison to get her concurrence. I think that's when we think the numbers will have settled enough so that we can actually fill in some of those placeholders that were in the draft that was in the packet.
Okay, further comments, discussion? Everybody's tired, wants to go home. City Manager, I think I'm ready to turn it over back to you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Well, that's the end of the presentation for tonight. As you saw, there's a lot of work left to be done and a lot of times that we'll be checking in. On behalf of the staff, this was truly helpful and we really appreciate all of you giving us the extra time. And thank you so much for your insightful comments. So you'll see those reflected in the next round. But,
Okay. With that, I'm going to adjourn this special meeting of the City Council and Planning Commission. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Bye.